Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another edition of Budget Magic. So as you know, we're kind of counting down the days until Aether Revolt releases on Magic Online. We got this week's episode, one more episode next week, and then we will be playing Aether Revolt for a while and checking out all the sweet new cards. But for this week, we're going to be heading to Modern to play a deck that's built around a standard card. This is Mono-Blue Colossus, built around Metalwork Colossus for Modern. As you can see, 94 bucks in the paper world, 30 ticks on Magic Online, so a pretty sweet price for a surprisingly weirdly competitive Modern deck. So a quick reminder before we break down the deck: if you enjoy this Mono-Blue Colossus deck and you enjoy Budget Magic in general, it would be amazing of you if you could take a second, click that subscribe button down in the corner of your screen. It's a great way to support the channel and the site for free. So let's talk Mono-Blue Colossus in Modern, and of course the namesake card Metalwork Colossus. We've seen this one in Standard, 11 mana 10/10, however it gets cheaper if we have non-creature artifacts. For each converted mana cost of non-creature artifacts we control, we deduct that off Metalwork Colossus's mana cost. So if we can get 11 mana worth of non-creature artifacts, Metalwork Colossus becomes free. Plus we can also get it back from the graveyard, but the main thing we're trying to do with Metalwork Colossus is get it really cheap, or preferably free, and then we can kind of amp up the power level in Modern because we have all these other cards. Metalwork Colossus is okay in Standard, but it's limited because we don't have really crazy non-creature artifacts. But if we go back to Modern, we have a ton of options, including an instant win combo with Akroma's Memorial. So it's not really instant win, but it's pretty close. So basically what we're trying to assemble with this deck is getting Akroma's Memorial on the battlefield, and it's only a one-of, but we got a ton of tutors so we can find it when we need it. That's going to reduce the cost of our Metalwork Colossus by 7 mana, making it only 4 mana, meaning if we have maybe one other non-creature artifact, it'll be free, and then it gives our Metalwork Colossuses Flying, First Strike, Vigilance, Trample, Haste, Pro Red, and Pro Black. So basically, we play, hopefully, 2 Metalwork Colossuses. We do have Sanctum of Ugin and some other tutors, so play 2 Metalwork Colossuses, and we just 20 our opponent in the air with First Strike and Trample and Haste and Vigilance, so even if our opponent doesn't die, we have these 10/10s with protection from a bunch of stuff back on defense, and the protection colors are really relevant. If you think about how an opponent will most likely kill a Metalwork Colossus in Modern, it's red cards that destroy artifacts like Ancient Grudge or Wear Tear, or it's black cards like Victim of Night, Doomblade, but Akroma's Memorial gives our Metalwork Colossus protection from both of those colors. Yes, Path to Exile is still an issue, but otherwise, it helps us dodge essentially all the most common removal in Modern. So that's kind of the idea of the deck. We're going to hopefully get multiple Metalwork Colossuses for free with an Akroma's Memorial on the battlefield and just 20 our opponent in the air. So I talked about tutors, and we have a whole bunch. So Sanctum of Ugin, you see the same trick in Standard. You play it as a land. Once you cast a Metalwork Colossus or another big artifact, you sack it, get a Metalwork Colossus. If you have 2, you sack it, get another one. So that's how we can kind of play a whole bunch of Colossi in the same turn and beat our opponent down with the Akroma's Memorial. But we also get Treasure Mage, which just tutors for an artifact with converted mana cost 6 or more. So that can get us our Akroma's Memorial to reduce the cost on our Metalwork Colossus and combo off. Or if we have Akroma's Memorial, we can get our Metalwork Colossus and go to town that way. There's also a couple other targets we'll talk about as we go along. As far as making our Colossus cheap, we have -7 mana from our Akroma's Memorial. Then we have a ton of mana rocks, and these cards are really sweet because they kind of add even more mana than you'd think for Metalwork Colossus. If you think of, let's say, Hedron Archive, which is a 4-of, its converted mana cost is 4, which happens to mean if we have an Akroma's Memorial, 4 plus 7 equals 11, equals free Metalwork Colossuses, equals we win the game. But they also tap for mana, so kind of by itself, Hedron Archive makes our Metalwork Colossus cost 6 less, but we have Guardian Idol and Mind Stone on turn 2. Then we have Hedron Archive on turn 3, hopefully, if we have a Mind Stone, and then they can get us to Dreamstone Hedron as early as turn 4, and then we're at free Colossus time. The other nice thing about most of our mana rocks is if we get so much mana we don't really need it, we can always cash them in for more cards. If you think about our deck, we have all this mana, so in the late game, it's not very efficient, but we can just draw and sack a Hedron Archive, draw 2 extra cards, and because we make so much mana, a 6 mana colorless divination Contortion actually isn't the worst thing ever in our deck. It helps us find our Colossuses, our other combo pieces. We also have a couple more creatures that kind of disrupt the opponent and protect our combo. So Lodestone Golem takes advantage of the fact that we have all artifacts, and our opponent most likely doesn't. Like, if we run into Affinity, it's bad, but in most matchups, makes non-artifacts cost one more. So all of our stuff, or most of our stuff at least, doesn't change, but our opponent's stuff is more expensive to cast. So it makes it a little harder for our opponent to kill us, to counter our stuff, and it's super good in some matchups. If our opponent's looking to play a bunch of pump spells, and Infect or something like that, Lodestone Golem is just great. It makes it so hard for them to execute their game plan. Same for Storm decks or Blue-Red Prowess or so and so forth. And it's fine in other matchups as well, just kind of making our opponent play off curve. And then Padim, just a one-of, draws us some cards, but mostly protects all our artifacts. So our Mana Rocks can't get killed, our Colossi can't get killed. And then we have some real defense. Stoic Rebuttal and Condescend kind of take advantage of the construction of our deck. They're not the most popular counters in Modern, but in our deck they're really good. So since we have so many artifacts, Stoic Rebuttal is pretty much counterspell in our deck, at least after like turn 3 or 4, just 2 blue mana, counter anything, and even if we gotta cast it as a cancel for 3 mana, it's not the end of the world. And then Condescend is a counter that takes advantage of the fact we have so much mana. When Condescend is a hard counter and you have enough mana to counter pretty much anything with it, it's really good because it lets us scry 2, find our combo pieces. So in a normal deck, it's not that great because you might not have the mana, but in our deck with so many Mana Rocks, it's really easy to counter anything with Condescend and kind of get some card filtering out of it. Spatial Contortion and All Is Dust, just a bit of removal. We have a bunch more in the sideboard, but a little hedge in the main deck to kill our opponent's early game stuff. All Is Dust is essentially a one-sided Wrath, gets Planeswalkers too if need be. And then we have Thirst for Knowledge to kind of hold everything together. Draw 3, discard an artifact, hopefully. So it cycles through our deck really well. It's instant speed, so we can leave up our counters and do it on our opponent's end step. And in the early game, we can even discard a Colossus, searching for Mana Rocks and counter spells and so forth. And then we can always get the Colossus back by sacking a couple of useless artifacts. And then we have a backup plan, and our backup plan is the Mindslaver Academy Ruins lock. So basically, with this plan, if we can get up to 13 mana, which might sound like a ton, but with all our Mana Rocks isn't that unbelievable, we can just Mindslaver our opponent every turn, which means we control our opponent every turn, which means they can't really do anything. While it's hard to pull off on Magic Online, in the paper world, what you can do is just win by essentially making your opponent play through their entire library. On your turn, you just put Mindslaver on top of your library, play it, sack it, control your opponent's turn. On their turn, you just draw a card, discard a card at the end of their turn, pass the turn, do it again. Eventually, you're not going down any cards in your library because Mindslaver keeps going on the top of your library, and your opponent's just going to mill themselves out. On the other hand, you can sometimes just kill your opponent with their own cards. And then, even as a one-shot, Mindslaver is not bad. There's some situations where just being able to get our opponent's blockers out of the way will free up our Metalwork Colossuses to win the game, get the removal out of their hand, and so forth. In the mana base, Inventor's Fair gives us another tutor. Darksteel Citadel is a land that we can sack to get Metalwork Colossus back from the graveyard. Buried Ruin gets an artifact back from the graveyard, one shot, so it's kind of a backup Academy Ruins in some sense, except you only get to use it once. And then a bunch of islands. In the sideboard, a ton more removal. Dismember, Spatial Contortions, Warping Whales, Gut Shots. Basically, we need to be able to kill our opponent's stuff in the early game in some matchups. And then we have Ratchet Bomb to get rid of tokens, non-creature permanents, which Mono-Blue can struggle with. Echoing Truth can bounce like an Ensnaring Bridge. Negate for more protection. And that is Mono-Blue Colossus for Modern. And that's our budget magic for this week. So I think this deck is pretty sweet. The idea is really neat. It has some weaknesses. Stony Silence, for example, can be pretty good against us because it stops all of our Mana Rocks. So we do have some fragile aspects, and there's some sideboard cards that are really bad for us. The thing I like about it, though, is it really catches people by surprise. It's very possible for us to ramp into the combo kill by turn 4 or turn 5 with a Chroma's Memorial, and we have a ton of ways, so much redundancy for setting this up, with Inventor's Fair and Treasure Mages and Thirst for Knowledge, and all of our other tutor effects, our Sanctum of Ugins. It's really easy for us to assemble a Chroma's Memorial go with at least one Metalwork Colossus, and then that one Metalwork Colossus usually gets us more Metalwork Colossuses, and we have some good defense. Condescend, some removal, the Stoic rebuttals, so the deck is pretty reasonable all around. It's not as fast as the fastest decks in Modern, but I think Modern is slowing down just a touch, which might mean a turn 4, turn 5 deck like this, especially with some decent disruption in the early game, might be fast enough to keep up with a lot of the decks in the format. Anyway, that's our budget magic for this week. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the gameplay videos, and I will talk to you soon.